Welcome to the conversation. I am Carrie Ann, and I will be your host in this first segment of the show. I have back Jared, our resident astronomer.
Here I am. Yay.
I also have a Mike with us, our loyal rocket specialist. And of course, even more loyal than that, I have a Dada who will be producing the show. Now, today in news...
Get your eyes and neck muscles ready because the moon is going to be slipping into a shadow this week.
Mike?
And also, the robotic arm at the space station got a brand new hand, but it doesn't seem to work.
Oh, so frustrating. In our second segment of the show, we're actually going to be joined by Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut, and all of the boys are going to be discussing the highly anticipated upcoming Falcon Heavy launch. And then in our third segment, we're going to come back. I'm going to be able to come back, at least for that one. And we're going to be discussing your questions and comments about last week's show. But this is tomorrow, Orbit 11.04.
Good morning. How's everything up in the sky?
So I want to make sure, I'm probably going to get this wrong because we've changed a couple of things, but I want to make sure I give a huge thank you to our supporters, to our citizens. These are the Escape Velocity citizens. As you will note at the very top, right underneath Escape Velocity citizens, it says patreon.com/TMRO, as well as, I was going to screw it up. I was going to say minds.com, but that doesn't say minds.com, does it? It says makersupport.com/TMRO. Oh, see, that's what happens when you have a script and then you have to go off script. In any case, these are the people who have given us way too much of their time and money, and we appreciate every single one of them for all of the things that they do for us. Hopefully, we still make you happy and proud of us. In any case, if you are interested in getting your name, at the very least, in the show, but actually so much more than that, too much to go over in this segment, please hit up patreon.com/TMRO or makersupport/TMRO. I think we actually want to do like a support page, and so then we can just throw everybody there. Like I said, we've had a couple of different changes. Thank you for sticking with us. I know some things have been a little strange and a little different and what have you, but we really do appreciate all of the support that you guys give us so that we can continue to do this, not just for us, actually for you, not just for you, it's for us, is what I'm trying to say. Oh, man, that was rough. Any case, we'll talk about that later.
Thank you to everybody.
Yes, exactly.
Y'all are awesome. So.
All right, so the other thing we like to do at the very top of the show, besides listen to me ramble on, is we actually like to listen to Mike tell us about launches, and particularly the launches that we may have had since last week. And there's a couple of things going on. This first one I'm actually really excited about for a number of reasons that I can't talk about on air, but we can discuss that maybe in After Dark. Mr. Mike, what am I talking about?
Well, what you're referring to is after 4 years of development, Rocket Lab has successfully launched one of their Electron rockets into orbit and even brought a couple of satellites along for this first ride as well. And this happened last Saturday on January 20th, although it was technically Sunday, January 21st, because the launch occurred at 1:43 Coordinated Universal Time, launching from Rocket Lab's launch site at the Mahia Peninsula in New Zealand. So I'm really excited about this. This was the second flight ever of Electron, and they got it this time.
So cool.
5, 4, 3,
Ignition.
All right. Standing only 17 meters, or about 55 feet tall, this made of black carbon composite material, kerosene-fueled rocket ignited 9 Rutherford main engines on its first stage, and then later a single vacuum-optimized Rutherford engine on its second stage, ignited about 2.5 minutes into flight. Oh, man. Apparently, the first and second stages performed well, and the payload fairing even separated when it was supposed to, and the trajectory of the flight looked really good. And on screen, screen, at some point, you'll see in a little bit here, there was even some spent battery packs that fell away from the upper stage. And at first, I thought they might have been the CubeSat deployers, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. That happened in about 6.5 minutes after launch. Now, the first flight of Electron, which was dubbed just a test, failed due to a ground tracking error. Controllers lost flight of that during its flight last year in May of 2017, and it prompted the safety officer to send a command to terminate the mission. But this launch, which was dubbed still testing, not only was able to reach the speed and trajectory planned, they were able to have a ground communication with it the entire time, and it carried with it 3 commercial CubeSats as well as a demo satellite on this launch. You just you can see the payload back, and right about here is what I'm talking about, where that battery pack, which is that silver lining right there, separates right there. So cool. I thought that was the CubeSats at first, but we didn't get to see footage of that, unfortunately. But for the 8-minute flight, everything went successfully, and tracking data published by the U.S. military indicated that the rocket reached an orbit of about 179 miles by 331 miles, or 289 by 533 kilometers. Now, flying around the planet at an angle of about 82.9 degrees when it deployed one of the CubeSats and a reflective satellite named Humanity Star, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The CubeSats were for Spire Global and for Planet, formerly Planet Labs. And Rocket Lab had another surprise with this launch. What we're seeing here, and this diagram looks at it a little bit better, is a previously unknown kick stage. So technically, this is the 3rd stage of the Electron rocket, and it deployed the other 2 CubeSats after it did a circularization maneuver. And the kick motors and the other 2 satellites reached a circular orbit of about 500 by 535 kilometers. So that was a bit of a surprise to see that. And something else that they deployed before using this kick motor was their Humanity Star. And according to Rocket Lab, the Humanity Star is a really bright, blinking satellite that's designed to encourage everyone to look up and consider our place in the universe. And for a really good sense of scale, there's the founder, Peter Beck, standing next to it before, of course, they got it ready to actually launch for this. And it measures around 1 meter in diameter and is expected to last around 9 months to a year before re-entering the atmosphere. And supposedly, amateur astronomers are supposed to be able to see this, and you might even be able to see it from the naked eye. So that's really cool that they were able to deploy not only this interesting demo satellite, but also 3 commercial CubeSats as well. And Rocket Lab is hoping that now that they have successfully flown the Electron rocket, they can start launching a whole bunch more and ramp up their production and start fulfilling a lot of their launch contracts that they've already signed up for, which includes a whole bunch of different commercial partners, including at least 1 NASA payload so far already. So this is so awesome.
Actually, Jarnis in the, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that name wrong, from the Twitch channel is asking if anyone here has seen the disco ball. Jared, have you even looked yet?
So I looked up on their own website about that. Their own tracking website to figure out when it's going to be, and it said that it's not going to be visible here in the Los Angeles area for at least 87 days.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't seen it. I haven't heard from people about seeing it either. I saw someone on Twitter talking about that they saw it, but it was at like magnitude 8, which is two magnitudes below the threshold for visible.
Gotcha.
For your eyes.
Right.
So yeah, I really haven't seen much other than also upset astronomers about it as well.
Yes.
So.
I'm sure we can discuss that later.
Sure.
But that's cool. But so none of us have seen it. Mike, I assume you also haven't seen it because not that you're in the LA area, but you're close-ish enough that our areas are kind of small. Okay. Anyway, so there's that. And then this China launch. Go ahead and talk about this China launch, and then I wanted to refer to something that came up on YouTube. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, real quickly, there was a Long March 2C rocket that launched on Thursday, January 25th. And this launched at 5:39 Coordinated Universal Time from the Xichang Satellite Launch Center for China's 5th launch of the year. And the payloads for it were the 4th group of the Yaogan 30 satellites. They are technically remote sensing satellites for Earth observation, scientific experiments, land surveying, crop yield assessment, and disaster monitoring, but they are assumed to be military military reconnaissance satellites. Once again, it was a little bit hard to find footage of this. There is footage that exists, but I was unable to get it ready for this. And we really need to start getting on Weibo and getting a lot more of this information, since it seems like there's a bit of a blackout this year. It's
totally
a little bit troubling.
Let's get a Kickstarter
but there was a
going
successful
for that.
launch for that.
Yes.
Let's
Yeah,
kickstart
right?
the Chinese Space Agency video division.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
So why not?
So there were a couple of people in our YouTube comments from this last show that very quickly were talking about how it's a little unfortunate that we don't have any footage from these China launches and how so they all sort of look the same, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes that's true. And particularly our producer had mentioned even if they do look alike, there are reasons that they're doing all these different launches, and sometimes the payloads are different and all those sorts of things. So I very much so famously have talked about how all of the space shuttles look alike, et cetera, et cetera. And, in a lot of ways, a lot of launches can look very similar, but we still like to talk about them. We still like to, the whole idea here is that there are more and more launches, and hopefully very shortly in the future here, Mike will actually have to eventually pick and choose what 5 best launches there are, because we're not going to have a whole, segment only on launches if there's been 20 launches in the last week. And we hope that happens. We really do. But between here and there, we just like to get excited about launches, even if there isn't enough footage for it.
This is like the best problem to have.
Yeah.
And if you had asked someone maybe like 10 years ago, maybe even as recently as 5 years ago, hey, do you guys think that you're going to have to narrow down and start choosing the top 5 launches of the week? We probably would have. I'm sure a lot of us probably would have been like, "What are you talking about? There's never been 5 launches."
I know.
In a
Just
week,
in this last orbit, we had mentioned how unusual it was when there was a week where we didn't have any launches to cover.
Yeah.
And that only came up like 2 or 3 weeks. It was ridiculous.
That's bizarre.
Which is awesome. So awesome. So we're right there. And then very shortly, when we do have to pick and choose, we will probably pick and choose ones that have footage. So
what if we made like another show?
Really good footage.
It's like we have Tomorrow Science and Tomorrow Cities. What about Tomorrow Launches?
I'm in.
So
somebody tell Ben.
Just for launch.
Yeah.
We're making decisions without him here. Yeah, right? All right. So, Mike, speaking of launches, there was at least one more. Go ahead with that.
Now, this one is a little bit interesting. This also happened on Thursday, January 25th. This was an Ariane 5 launch that was launching 2 telecommunications satellites. But it seemed like there was a little bit of an anomaly during the launch. But things might have ended up being okay. So let's check it out.
5, 4, 3, 2, unité, top. Allumage moteur Vulcain. Allumage EAP, top décollage.
Now, the payloads for this mission, this launch occurred at 22:20 Coordinated Universal Time, as I said, on Thursday, January 25th, from the French Guiana Space Center. And the payloads were the SES-14 and Alya-3 telecommunications satellites. And the first part of the launch, initially, everything seemed to go as planned. And even during the anomalous part of the launch, it seemed that the error wasn't immediately known. What I'm talking about is that after the core stage of the Ariane 5 separated and the upper stage engine ignited, the ground controls lost contact with the rocket and spacecraft. There was a planned short telemetry blackout, but contact was never reestablished. Live telemetry displayed on Arianespace's live webcast and on the status boards stopped showing the rocket's altitude, downrange distance, and velocity, and the range operations director did not announce any further milestones. Nevertheless, Arianespace's launch broadcast commenter continued calling out flight milestones, such as the ground station passes, second stage shutdown, and separation of at least the SES-14 satellite, as if officials had confirmed their completion. Now, Arianespace paused their live broadcast after that, and officials were unable to determine the outcome of the mission at that point. However, Stéphane Israël, the French launch provider's chief executive, did make an announcement saying, acknowledging this error here, and that they had not been able to establish contact with the spacecraft. spacecraft. However, just a couple of hours later, and even through the following days, both Arianespace and both the customers have announced, or rather put out official statements saying that indeed they were able to eventually reestablish contact with the spacecraft, which were placed into orbit and separated from the upper stage of the Ariane 5 successfully. However, they were placed into a slightly lower than planned orbit. They were being sent into a geosynchronous transfer orbit, and we're going to be using their onboard thrusters to eventually get into the correct geostationary orbit. However, that's still going to happen. It's just going to take 4 weeks longer than was originally planned for those satellites to get into their final orbits. So I guess we can call this I'm not even sure if we would call this a partial failure or if we can call this a complete success. It's not a complete success because they lost contact, but I mean, the end goal of the mission still was a success. And even though they're going to be conducting an investigation into this, the rest of the Ariane 5 launches are going to be continuing as planned. There's supposed to be another one on March 1st, and Arianespace has said that hasn't been delayed or anything like that. So I hope that everything is fine. And one of the things that was said on one of the updates is that this might have just possibly been a problem with the ground stations themselves and wasn't necessarily a problem with the rocket, although again, why was it placed into a lower orbit? So hopefully we'll get some more information, but yeah, that's what happened with that. So good job, Arianespace.
Right? Was it you who retweeted somebody talking about how orbit is not a destination, it's a inclination?
Yes.
Right?
So yeah, I think it was something like that.
It was something
and the
along those
inclination was 17. It was 17 degrees off inclination that it was supposed to be in.
Right.
That one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I was just about to say I saw on Twitter Jonathan McDowell, who's Planet4589 on Twitter. I can't remember his name, but he said that in looking back on things, this is actually one of the most off-nominal inclinations ever launched to by a rocket in history. So they're kind of close to the same altitude, but there's still a lot of inclination change that has to occur. That's a lot of energy that you have to expect from your satellite.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I'd call it a partial failure, honestly. That's my opinion. So yeah.
Yeah. The views and opinions expressed here, something.
Hashtag opinion's mine.
Right.
So.
Interesting. So yeah, I guess we'll just have to keep updated on what's going on with that, and hopefully we don't get like a zombie sat sort of situation going on.
Yes.
Which there was another tweet, I think that was also you, who retweeted somebody. It says something along the lines of like, who decided to call it like zombie sat graveyard and not...
who called them graveyard orbits and not orbituaries?
Right, because... Obituaries.
So funny.
Oh, come on, you guys.
That was Colin Crumb on there. So.
I'm not a punny person, but that got
was a good
me.
one.
That was really good.
Yeah, quite like that one. So.
Oh my goodness.
I guess I'm the only one who liked that. So, anyways.
Well, I did laugh out loud. Like I appreciated that for what that was worth.
It's a good one.
All right, so Mr. Jared.
Yes.
You've been gone.
I have.
Ben's been in your place.
Yes.
And he has done a terrible Jared impression.
That's okay. That's why I'm back. So, with Ben hair.
This is true.
Yeah.
You shaved your head and your beard.
It'll be back. So
good.
Yeah.
So, Neutron Star. This just reminds me of that 80s song because I'm old. Remember.
80s song? Which one?
I don't. I'll look it up later.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So, wait, can we mention it on here? Anyways.
Probably not.
Back in August of 2017, we had those two neutron stars collide, and we detected the gravitational waves from them. And it was the first time we detected what we call an optical counterpart, which is something that we actually see in visible light from a gravitational wave event. So that was super exciting. And it's actually sort of, not unusual for astronomers to look at these kinds of events and observe them for long periods of time after they've occurred. So they continue to look at light from the collision in this galaxy, which is very conveniently named NGC 4993. And it's about 130 million light years away from us. Now, there was a gamma ray burst, so really high energy light coming from this event, and it was observed in really great detail. And in addition to that, we kept looking at it in gamma rays and X-rays and radio, and usually the event will sort of fade away. It appears, it's very, very bright, and then it fades away over very long periods of time. But this one is not fading away, and in fact, it's actually brightening. And there's new observational data that suggests that we need to maybe make our models for these neutron star mergers a little more complicated than we actually have them at right now. And there's actually a couple ideas as to why it brightened and continued to do so. And one is that this collision generated a jet that heated the surrounding gases. So it's like a warm cocoon, but it's so energetic that this material is still glowing in the X-ray and radio bands for months. Now, one of the problems in observing this through the X-ray and optical data was that as the Earth orbits around the sun moves through the sky. So the sun ended up moving through the part of the sky near this galaxy, NGC 4993, so close to it that we couldn't observe it. But we had to wait a little bit, and then once the sun was out of the way, we went back with our radio telescopes and X-ray telescopes, and there it was. It had brightened even further by the time we got it back in December. So this is really like actual unexplored territory in stellar physics. Like, we've only seen one other neutron star merger before, which we don't call them supernovas or anything. We actually call them kilonovas.
Of course we do.
So yes, because we have to label things, you know.
Kilo being like 1,000?
Something like that. So yeah, like it's 1,000. It's 1,000 more betters with it. So yeah, that's how it works. And, you know, this is only the second one we've ever seen. So the idea of this sort of being different from what we expected is not like completely out of the ordinary. So, and also just a really cool thing I wanted to talk about with this, that gravitational wave was one of the most observed events in the history of astronomy, actually. We used both the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, LIGO, here in the United States, and then Virgo, the Gravitational Wave Observatory in Europe. And because we had 3 of them working together, there's 2 for LIGO and 1 for Virgo, we could figure out where it is on the sky very precisely. And then we observed it with over 70 telescopes here on the Earth and in space. Nice. So when that paper came out about the initial observations, there were over 4,000 astronomers cited as working on that paper, which, if you want to know just how many is that, that's 1/3 of the total professional global astronomical community. So literally 1 out of every 3 astronomers had a hand in that paper that came out.
That's awesome.
That's how big a deal that was. Because like literally the entire community came together and worked on it. And here we are, we're getting great data still coming after it and still scratching our heads a little bit, but that's what we do in science. We scratch our heads a lot. So
that would happen to them.
Yeah, that's where it went. So yeah,
right on.
Well, you know.
Wow, that's very, very cool.
Yeah.
The song I was referencing is Neutron Dance by the Pointer Sisters, in case anybody is wondering. So, Mr. Mike, as you teased in the news cold open there, something is wrong with CanadaArm's new hand? What is happening?
Right. Yeah, it's got a new hand that it's a grapple mechanism that was installed this week on Tuesday, January 23rd. And it seems that they have had a bit of a problem with it. Essentially, I'll get to what the problem is in a second, but rather than just kind of let it be, what they're going to do is on Monday, they're going to have another planned spacewalk to take off that new hand and put on the old one that was previously there so that both the grapple mechanisms on the CanadaArm will work.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, the older grapple mechanism or hand, which is officially called the latching end effector or LEE, the old one is still fully functional, and it has all the primary and backup control systems. And it did experience some, additional wear and tear over the past couple of years. That's why they've wanted to replace it in the first place. And the astronauts that worked on this on Tuesday was astronaut Mark Vande Hei and Japanese crewmate Norishige Kanai, who, as I said, were already planning on doing a spacewalk on Monday to do other repairs and different tasks, but instead are just going to be replacing the old hand that they've already replaced from the new one. Now, NASA and the Canadian Space Agency, which provided the robotic arm, they've been carrying out really extensive troubleshooting to come up with a fix for the problem. Essentially, the new hand isn't communicating with the rest of the arm and the different controllers on the station itself, and we're unable to get a response from it. So on Monday, January 29th, they're going to put back on the old one, and they did do a couple of tests to power up the CanadaArm after they had kind of disconnected all of the new connections on the new grapple mechanism to make sure that everything else was still working and it wasn't a problem with the arm itself. And something that I really like about it is this 50-foot-long robotic arm actually moves end over end. It's not attached at one point. It kind of moves like an inchworm or even like a slinky toy from one mounting fixture to the other as it's doing the different sites. And that was something that I didn't even know until last year when they replaced the first end of the hand, which apparently is still working correctly. That was last October, and as some of you may remember, Peggy Whitson was the one who worked on that. And that one's working just fine, and this new one, the old one is stored on the outside of the station, not very far away. So it's going to be pretty easy to be able to replace the old one back in place to where it was. But until they're able to do that, they just want to make sure that they have all the redundancy needed to be able to use the arm for its purposes of moving astronauts or even moving different modules that are mounted on the outside, and coming up for moving around the different commercial cargo vehicles that first have to be grappled by the robotic arm and then burst into place. So, yeah, I'm really hoping that they will able to have no problems with this. And NASA and the Canadian Space Agency has said that if they do come up with any sort of solution, or rather finding the exact problem for the communication error, if it's just some sort of software error that needs to be fixed, then hopefully they can just complete that before the new hand is removed and not have to reschedule this spacewalk to replace the old hand. But kind of interesting that this problem is happening. It always stinks when I don't know about you guys, but have you ever worked on a car or just any type of thing and you get the new replacement for it and it doesn't fit, or there's just always some little problem with it that you can't get it quite into place. So that must
Ben always thinks that IKEA always throws in extra parts for any sort of IKEA thing. He's like, no, we don't need those. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they included those for a reason, which is a slightly different thing, but I understand. Yeah, so Minimus11 from our YouTube channel was asking, is it a hardware or software problem? It sounds like maybe they don't know, because if the old hand is talking just fine and the new hand is not talking just fine, that could be anywhere between a hardware or a software problem, which is a little unfortunate. So yeah, hopefully they get that figured out. A lot of things to birth at the International Space Station. A lot more things than you think that there would be.
Yeah.
Birth, B-E-R-T-H, not birth, B-I-R-T-H. In other words, reaching out, grabbing, and bringing into the space station, as opposed to something coming up and parking right at it. In any case, Mr. Jared.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike, by the way.
Yeah,
Mr. Jared. So, life's ingredients found in meteorites.
Yeah.
Can't tell if that's a tasty headline or if you're just trying to, is that like clickbait?
I don't know if this is the kind of science you can lick, but you can always give it a try. But if you want to, you could go to the Berkeley National Laboratory and lick the science there and see if it works.
That sounds awesome.
Because they've placed several meteorites under really intense scientific scrutiny, and they have found the things that life needs in those meteorites. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Cats, coffee.
Heavy blankets, coffee. Good, perfect.
Yeah, things like that.
I'm on the next meteorite.
So they found very rich deposits of organic material. Now, specifically these rich deposits of organic material, they are not proof that there is life off of Earth somewhere.
Okay.
So just let's get that out of the way immediately.
So there's the ingredients for life.
The ingredients
but
for
not
life.
The proof of life.
But it's not proof of life.
All right.
So listen up, Internet.
Copy
ingredients
that.
for life, not proof of life.
Right. Well, I mean, you have eggs and milk and flour does not make a cake, but you have the ingredients for cake.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy for it.
Cake is a lie. Got it.
Now, it does show us that during the formation of our solar system, there actually was the necessary ingredients for life just zipping around in that nebulous cloud that ended up forming everything. Now, this is why we study meteorites and comets and things like that. They're the leftovers of the formation of our solar system. They've been, relatively untouched since the solar system formed about 4.6 billion years ago.
Sure.
And they're like cosmic time capsules. They tell us precisely what was around during that period in our solar system's history. Now, the study also found water that was locked away in the salt crystals, preserving the simple organics. This suggests that at some point they may have been exposed to an ocean world in the asteroid belt, perhaps like Ceres in its earlier, more geologically and hydrologically active days at that time.
See what you did there.
So now, only 2 meteorites were actually sampled in this study, but there's a lot more sealed up at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and they're going to go ahead and move forward and pull a lot of those out and put them also under that intense scrutiny as well to see if there is consistency amongst different samples throughout the solar system.
Nice.
But so far, things that sort of hang out in the asteroid belt, looks like the ingredients for life are actually there.
I was just going to ask. So, is there a growing swell of popularity around the idea that we would find consistencies across meteorites?
Potentially.
Or do we have the two camps of like Pluto is a planet, Pluto's not a planet?
So
we think there's going to be consistencies, and the other group is like, no, why would there be consistencies?
Yeah, so one of the things is that we're actually sort of consistently finding the ingredients for life all over the solar system, which those are schnapps, by the way, which is CHNOPS, which is carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Those are some the key 6 elements that make up the ingredients of life.
Like Stoge said it, there you go.
Yes,
so you can
schnapps,
see it.
exactly. So it's just so much easier to say schnapps than it is to say all 6 of those elements together.
As it is.
So yes, you heard it here on the show. Life must be loaded with schnapps at all times. But what was really sort of the big start to trying to figure out the consistency of schnapps all over the solar system was Rosetta at Churyumov-Gerasimenko 67P, finding schnapps on that comet.
Interesting.
Because that tells us that schnapps was likely present throughout the solar system during its formation. And that's really important because that sort of means that the seeds for life could be all over the solar system. It's just that the environments are what matters. So.
Nice. And for anyone who is just joining us and was not with us back in the days when Rosetta was kind of bouncing around, can you give a quick synopsis of that?
Yeah, so the Rosetta mission was launched by the European Space Agency to rendezvous with a comet, 67P. It arrived there in 2014. Dropped a little lander called Philae to the surface. It bounced and fell over, but we still got incredible data from it at that point. And it sort of sniffed out the comet, checked it out, and then eventually deorbited itself and landed on the comet in 2016. But for the 2 years that it was at the comet 67P, we got incredible data that sort of changed how we look at comets and their relationship to other objects in the solar system. So it was
schnapps, apparently.
It was a fantastic mission. Everything that could go right did go right, except for the Philae bit for Rosetta. So it was really sweet. So.
Very cool. All right, because in case anybody asks. And then very quickly, I know you wanted to do this before we go into break. You wanted to talk about the lunar eclipse that's coming up, and you literally wrote in the rundown, lunar eclipse, words.
Yeah, that's right.
I wish you guys could see some of these things.
Yeah, because it's
kind of amazing.
It's just going to be a really quick, just to remind you, on Wednesday morning, January 31st, we're going to be having a total lunar eclipse that's going to be.
And this is the coolest, total lunar eclipse, blue moon of love.
Yeah,
in the
actually, it's a blue moon.
Age of the horizon or something.
It's a blue moon, so it's the second full moon of the month. In addition to that, it's a super moon because the moon is at one of its closest points this year to us, and it's a total lunar eclipse at the same time. Which the cool thing about total lunar eclipses is you don't need any special equipment in order to go out and actually see a lunar eclipse. All you need to do is just literally look up in the sky.
I don't need special glasses. I don't have to go to somewhere special on Earth.
With a solar eclipse, you have to. But with a lunar eclipse, you don't have to.
Perfect.
You're perfectly fine.
So everybody can see this.
Yeah, so if you're in Eastern Asia, Australia, or North America, you are good to go. You're going to be able to go out and take a look at it. If you're in South America, Africa, or Western Europe, sorry. You're not going to be able to see it. But you'll get one in July, and then everyone else who's getting one now will not get the same eclipse.
We share. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool.
So this is from my job, actually, or one of my workplaces up at Griffith Observatory. This is the timeline for Los Angeles here in the United States. So this is at Pacific Standard Time. So what you could do, you can push pause or something, and then convert this to your local time for you to take a look. But lunar eclipses are very long events. They last hours. It's going to spend over an hour in totality, where the moon will darken and then turn red and then darken again and come back.
Awesome.
And this is just something really to look forward to because it's a really cool event to see this actually happen. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm going to be up watching the entire thing because I'll be working the live stream from Griffith Observatory.
Very cool. So
yeah.
that means I expect some really good updates next week.
Oh yeah, I'll try to be on Twitter as much as I can because it's just as it happens over 5 hours, there's going to be very little time to actually do anything.
Absolutely, you'll just be dumbfounded the whole time.
I'll just be red. So.
All right, awesome. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little bit of a calendar break so you can see all the things that Mike is going to be talking about next week at the start of the show. I figure that's just kind of the way that works, isn't it? In case. And when we come back, we are actually going to be joined by one Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut, and all of the boys are going to have a lovely, lively, and very nice discussion, boys, about the upcoming Falcon Heavy launch. So stay with us. There's more tomorrow coming right up.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
Hello and welcome back to Tomorrow. Now, before we get into our main segment here, we're going to talk a little bit about Falcon Heavy. I'm sure everyone wants to talk about that. We want to first thank once again our Escape Velocity patrons and citizens. These folks give us $10 or more per episode on Patreon and makersupport.com. And they get a load of goodies, by the way. You should definitely jump on patreon.com/TMRO or makersupport.com/TMRO and take a look at what you get. We also don't just have the Escape Velocity citizens. We also have our orbital citizens as well. These folks give us $5 or more per episode on Patreon, and you can head on over if you'd like to help crowdfund the shows of tomorrow over at patreon.com/TMRO, and also now makersupport.com/TMRO. So choose your flavor of how to help us out, and we'll give you a little something back in return. So thanks again to all of you who do, and thanks again to all of you who watch too. So, boy, I am joined by a holographic all-star team here, like the 1992 Olympic basketball dream team right here. I have got, closest to me here, I have got Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut. Yeah. Hi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And then, of course, we've also got Space Mike, our hologram in residence here at the Tomorrow Show. And we are going to be talking about something that many people have been talking about for a very long time, because this actually started a very long time ago, which is the upcoming Falcon Heavy launch. And everybody's getting extra excited because the static fire occurred this week, the first static fire. I'm sure there's going to be a couple more involved in that. But oh my gosh, we're on the precipice of it. We should probably talk a little bit about sort of the background on Falcon Heavy. And which one of you wants to grab the background on Falcon Heavy? Who feels up to telling us about Falcon Heavy?
I feel pretty up to snuff.
Go for
Mike,
it.
Is that okay?
Go ahead. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, Falcon Heavy was, Elon announced they were working, actually mentioned quickly, a Falcon 9 Heavy in 2008, briefly, and then it just kind of faded out. But 2012, he officially did a press release about Falcon Heavy, and basically he was going to be strapping 3 Falcon 9s together, and he said he hopes to see it launched by the end of 2013. So now you get a sense for those of us. I wasn't paying attention to them then, but I did know about Falcon Heavy come early 2014, and I've been waiting patiently since then. So my patient pants are 4 years old at this point. But yeah, so that's kind of how long we've been waiting really for Falcon Heavy, and it again is essentially 3 Falcon 9s put together. But the reason it got delayed so long is because the Falcon 9 wasn't done evolving and changing into the vehicle it is today. If they had made the Falcon Heavy out of the Falcon 9 circa 2012, the version 1.0 of the Falcon 9, they would have had to redevelop Falcon Heavy for every time they changed the Falcon 9, and it just wouldn't have been economical, wouldn't have made any sense. And so here we are with a much more mature Falcon 9. We're almost up to Block 5. This is going to be launching using Block 3 cores. That's a different story. But basically, it's mature enough now where they can at least land all 3 cores, and hopefully everything will be successful. And then they can they don't have to evolve as much beyond that to get it to kind of be Block 5 ready. So yeah, now we're ready. We're here. It's here. It happened. It fired. It's alive, and I'm really excited.
Yeah,
obviously.
It's actually Falcon Heavy is breathing. It's actually starting to go through the motions of a test flight that we're about to see with that coming up. And kind of speaking a little bit on that test flight, Mike, if you want to talk a little bit about the upcoming test flight, to kind of brief us a little bit about what's going to be happening, go ahead and give us just a little bit of background about it.
Well, sure. As we know, they have SpaceX had taken over the lease, apparently, of the historic launch pad 39A, and have done a lot of modifications to the launch pad over the years to make it work available for the Falcon Heavy. And since the launch pad 39A was used for the Saturn rockets and later the space shuttle, it was more than big enough for the Falcon Heavy, and maybe even a little bit too big for what they need for it. However, they were able to do a lot of the changes that they need to and upgraded the pad over the past couple of years and removed a lot of the hardware from the space shuttle program. And with this flight, I mean, it's going to be really exciting because both of the side booster cores have been used before. They've flown on previous flights as standalone Falcon 9s. And the core stage for it, of course, is a brand new stage, and they've had to do a lot of work over the years to make sure that it would be able to hold the loads from the side boosters and be able to be aerodynamically sound, especially when it's going through a max Q, the maximum dynamic pressure of flight. And at first, something that I'm a little bit disappointed by is when SpaceX first officially unveiled the Falcon Heavy in 2012, one of the capabilities that it was supposed to have was a fuel crossfeed capability. So the side boosters would be using their fuel to fire the engines in the core stage, so that when the side boosters of Falcon Heavy separated, the core stage would be completely full. And over the years, it looked like it got a little bit too difficult to be able to figure that out. And that might be something that SpaceX will bring back someday in the future. But as for now, it looks like they're not going to have any plans to do that. So over the years, they've had to do quite a few different design changes. And even with the Falcon 9 itself, as Tim Dodd mentioned, as they've had to do several redesigns and eventually have the Block 5, which may or may not be the final version, at least for a little while. So with all the different design changes that they've had to do over the years, that's kind of what has pushed this launch back. But now that it's finally here, I'm really excited for it. And of course, we've talked about how they're going to be used. The test weight for this mission is going to be Elon Musk's red Tesla Roadster. So that's a little bit ridiculous, but really awesome. And if it actually takes off, that's going to be amazing. And I'm sure there's going to be some sort of competition in the future to try to rendezvous with that Tesla Roadster flying around in space in solar orbit. And if it doesn't, of course, there was a really interesting chat that was brought up in our Discord channel where, if it doesn't work, the headline's probably just going to be something humorous like, Elon Musk blows up his car. But I am really excited for this. I am really excited. And there is a short video of the static fire test. They were only able to fire the engines for a couple of seconds. I'm not sure if we've been able to update in that here or not, but we'll try to show that if we can. But yeah, in any case, I believe it only the engines ignited and fired for around only 11 seconds. Tim Dodd, do you have more information about that?
It does look like the static fire was 11 seconds, according to kind of post analysis of people, looking for that specific thing, or you looking at outside footage. So SpaceX actually cut their footage down a little bit for whatever reason. I'm not entirely sure why they did that. Maybe I don't know, because sometimes they want to do that. But their footage showed only about a 6-second static fire. But uncut footage from other sources, there are people that were, at Kennedy Space Center with their cameras trained on the Falcon Heavy for static fire. It showed 11 seconds-ish, around 11 seconds of a duration burn. And there was talk previously about them staggering the ignitions of the engines. And it sounds like kind of through the, through the grapevine that we're hearing that maybe they don't stagger the individual engines, but they actually, for at least the static fire, we're igniting the cores separately. And actually, believe it or not, even though it does not sound like it, don't be fooled. From what I'm kind of understanding online, it's actually that it went side cores lit up first and then the center core, even though it seems like it goes from like loud to a billion times louder, which would people were saying, well, it's probably, center core and then the side cores. It actually seems like it was the other way around. So that's at least what we're still hearing and what we understand. And that's a way for them to be able to make sure they aren't lighting. If they light all 27 at once, especially the first time they did it, there's a chance, all 3 of those rockets are tied together by a common, or there's not a common, but they kind of have this octaweb part that holds all the engines together. And there's struts and these like flanges that kind of hold them together. The first time they light all 27 engines, if they had something wrong, if they would have lit them all simultaneously, there's a chance it would have ripped the whole vehicle apart, essentially. So they ramped into it gradually, and by igniting 2 of the cores at once, making sure everything's kind of good, probably making sure the alignment stays okay. And if then that was good to go, light the center core and make sure all 27 interact okay together. So seems like that's what we got.
Yeah,
and it seems like it was successful.
And igniting the staggered ignition of your engines is not completely unheard of in rocketry. The space shuttle main engines, they were all 3 of them were staggered. The Delta IV Heavy, its cores are staggered in their ignition. That's a little bit different from what may be happening with Falcon Heavy, since that's because there's lots of hydrogen in the area and you don't want to ignite all of it at once. But yeah, it's. I really appreciate the fact that SpaceX is taking their time to make sure everything is correct with it. I don't really see any indication of go fever at this. They're really actually checking all the boxes that they need to and making sure that everything is ready to go, and I have been thoroughly enjoying the attitude of it will go when it is ready to go. That's so much better with that there as well. So we do have a question from the chat room from Jim Burr, which is aimed at both Mike and Tim. What do you think the changes they made were for Falcon Heavy? What do you think those changes were? And if both of you want to speak to that, absolutely go for it. And we'll start with Mike talking about some of the changes that happened on there.
Well, of course, the big change from when Falcon Heavy was first officially announced to today is, of course, the reusability and the installation of the landing legs and the grid fins to be able to maneuver when they're re-entering the atmosphere. And all 3 cores, both the side boosters and this primary central core, are going to turn around and use their engines to have a controlled, nice, soft landing back at the different landing zones at Cape Canaveral. And there's going to be 3 of them now. Well, actually, 2 of them now. What's going to happen is that the 2 side boosters are going to land back at Landing Zone 1 and the newly constructed Landing Zone 2 at Cape Canaveral, and then the core booster is going to be landing at one of the ships at sea. It would just be too much fuel that would be required to do a boost back to return the core stage all the way back to the launch pad. So that was probably the biggest change from when the original design was first publicly presented, was having the full reusability of the core stages. So that was probably the biggest design change right there. And then, of course, when they initially, you might even want to touch on this one, Everyday Astronaut, the orientation of the engines on the Falcon 9 made a drastic change from the kind of 3 layers that they had to being in the octaweb design that they have now. So, of course, having to redesign everything from that, how the loads are exchanged, how it's going to perform aerodynamically, all of that. So.
Yeah, so to add to that, again, it's a good thing they didn't develop the Falcon Heavy based off the version 1.0, because as Mike said, they got smart and realized when they originally made the Falcon 9, it was in a 3x3 kind of tic-tac-toe orientation of the 9 engines of the Falcon 9. And it means they had to separately manufacture different pieces for different engines. And then they got smart and go, well, if we just make them all 8 the same kind of pie shape, we can make them in a circle and we can manufacture them all the same, and it saves us a lot of time and money. Common manufacturing, that's very smart. Now, specifically talking of what changed between a standard Falcon 9 and a Falcon Heavy, remember the 2 side cores have already gone to space. They have already landed. They've been refurbished and they've been outfitted to become side boosters. And this requires, we don't know exactly, it sounds like the fuselage is the same because the fuselage doesn't need to carry any additional loads per se. A lot of those loads get transferred into the center core. That's where the weight and the load happens. But they obviously had to add things to the octawebs to tie it into the center core. And they also had to add the aerodynamic nose cones and a different, there's no more inner stage. The inner stage is the part of the rocket that, I could probably just be pointing to my models back here, but the inner stage is very similar on a Falcon 9 and a Falcon Heavy, but it has to be beefed up a little bit for Falcon Heavy. There's more loads, potentially with a heavier payload. And so they had to design around that. So the center core is a lot different. It has to handle the stresses from the 2 side cores pushing in. There's a lot of torque going in, as well as a lot of torque, power lifting up. So it has to be able to handle that. It has to be able to handle the loads of a higher payload mass, kind of crunching it down. So they just had to beef up a lot of that. Those are kind of some of the main changes. And obviously then there's the connectors. There's longerons, these ties, these struts that hold the whole thing together. Think Kerbal Space Program, that are reusable. They fold in. So there's a lot of things that had to be thought of and engineered, and it's not just strapping 3 rockets together and lighting the candle. There's a lot to it, and that's why it took so long, and that's the differences, I guess. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. You just can't get a thing of duct tape and kind of stack everything together, It turns out.
Well, you could.
It turns out taking a single stick and making it a 3-stick rocket a lot harder than you expect it to be. So speaking of things that are a little bit harder than you expect it to be, we do have the footage of the static fire, and we want to go ahead and roll that just in case you haven't seen it. That was I'm sweating a little bit watching that. So yeah, that was really nice.
That's super nice.
And I love the big plume of water vapor also going out into the air above that.
Hey, wait, can we discuss that real quick? I've had people asking, look at all that pollution. Is that really water vapor from the deluge system and not actual exhaust?
Yeah, that should be water vapor.
It's a combination of both, I assume.
Yeah, well,
really?
With what the Falcon 9 uses, which is rocket propellant 1, which is a really highly refined grade of kerosene, and liquid oxygen, it sort of does develop. It's not particularly great. I wouldn't obviously breathe the exhaust coming off of Falcon 9. I just wouldn't recommend it. But yeah, most of what you're seeing there is water vapor. But that's not generated in a majority from the exhaust from the Falcon 9. But yeah, you're seeing basically the water deluge water boiling off, so that way the launch pad doesn't melt under the load of heat that those engines are going to put on it there. So yeah.
It just seems like to me too that plume was much, and probably it's because I haven't seen one in person, but it seems like the plume was much bigger than regular Falcon 9s, and it was very reminiscent of the huge plume that would come from the space shuttle launches.
Yeah,
so
I was gonna say
that was surprising to see.
I was gonna say it really reminded me of looking at the plumes coming off of the Saturn V's lifting off of those areas there, which would make sense at LC-39. So really cool stuff. Sort of to go with what the chat room has been asking, we've had sort of multiple people ask this question, but from Rebel Ace Friesland, which the question is, would they do another test launch this year if they're able to achieve most goals with the first test? Do you think that they're going to potentially have a second flight of Falcon Heavy as a test? Or if they knock off all the goals on the first flight, is there any reason to not put a paying customer's payload on the second flight? How about you, Mike?
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, as far as I know, there is only one customer that has officially been signed up for the Falcon Heavy, and that's the United States Air Force. They have something called STP, I believe it's number 2, Space Test Project number 2, that is going to be launching. I have no idea what that is. Probably is a classified payload. But that's the only one that I know of that is officially on the books for Falcon Heavy. And so there could potentially be another flight of Falcon Heavy this year. But something that I did want to mention is I have a feeling that we're going to see at least one more static fire test of the Falcon Heavy before it actually launches. Some of you guys who've been following SpaceX for a while may remember that, especially whenever they had a new version of the Falcon 9 come out, they would do full duration test firings. And I believe that that's standard for a lot of the other launches, is having a full duration test firing, static test firing where the rocket is held down. And they usually do those in McGregor, Texas, to make sure that everything works out before sending it onto the launch pad. So we're probably going to see a full duration static fire test of the Falcon Heavy, but that's just my theory. I just have a feeling about that. I haven't seen any information that confirms or denies that. But I do know that the Air Force is the only official customer for Falcon Heavy right now. So I guess it all depends on, the readiness of the Falcon Heavy and how this first test flight does. And if it does fail spectacularly, then we might see just another test flight without a paying customer's payload on board. And go from there. So I feel like there's a good chance, and if things go really well for this launch and they're able to recover all of the core stages, we will see this exact Falcon Heavy probably fly again, and hopefully this year. But if not, that's okay. I feel like once this launch goes off, then a lot of the customers are going to sign up for it. And there's so many different capabilities for this. I mean, just getting into low Earth orbit, I believe it's around 63 metric tons that it can deliver into low Earth orbit. And for most of their commercial customers that they've been looking at, sending stuff into geostationary orbit, I believe it's around 26 metric tons. So this is going to be more weight than the Delta IV Heavy that's be able to deliver into orbit. And of course, they have all the different amounts of weight that they could send to either lunar trajectories or even Martian trajectories. So this is going to be a very capable rocket. And I think once it's fully operational is when we're going to see, and I bet you anything that there probably is already a whole bunch of customers signed up for it, but those contracts haven't been officially signed and won't be officially signed until the rocket is operational. So we'll just see. In any case, there's going to be a huge Falcon 9 launch manifest this year, and if they ramp things up and are able to start pushing out more Falcon Heavies, that would be amazing.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback real quick before we go to you, Tim Dodd, on what you said, Space Mike. Spot on with the amounts that it can lift to orbit. To low Earth orbit, it'll do about 63 metric tons. To geosynchronous transfer orbit, in its expendable version, it can do 26 metric tons. In its reusable version, it can do 8 metric tons. To Mars, Falcon Heavy can enable nearly 17 metric tons, which is far bigger than anything we have ever sent to Mars by at least an order of magnitude. And then for all of those of you who are outer planet enthusiasts in the solar system, we could get 3.5 metric tons to Pluto using a Falcon Heavy if need be. So awesome. Pluto orbiter, let's make it happen. So let's go to you real quick, Tim, because you wanted to say something.
The one thing I wanted to correct Mike on, that I have not heard anything about a full duration static fire of all 3 cores. I don't think that's going to happen.
That's just a feeling that I have.
Okay. And the reason I don't think they will even do this is because they have already, each of the 3 cores individually at McGregor have gone through a longer duration static fire, around the minute mark or so. And don't forget, they literally test fire each engine on its own. This would be since these 2 Falcon 9, the side cores have already flown once. It means they were test fired on a test stand on their own out at McGregor. They come back, they get integrated onto the Octaweb, then they go out, get shipped out, then they do a longer duration static fire of around a minute, and then they come. Then normally they go back. They would go launch if they're a Falcon 9. In this case, this is the first time again that all 27 engines were lit, and I think they, those 5 or 6, 7 seconds or however long there is of all 27 engines running together. I think that's all the verification.
Verification.
I like
validation.
valification. I'll try that.
That's pretty cool.
That's probably all the validation they actually need to make sure that it runs, in line with everything they were hoping for. So I don't think we'll see another static fire. Personally, I think it's. So. I would, because that could lead to more delays, and the fact that they set a launch date of February 6th, for those of you wondering, and and then there was one other thing. I think there's a few more. I think I heard at one point there were 5 payloads, and if you go to the Falcon Heavy Wikipedia, I believe there were 5 payloads already public for Falcon Heavy. 2 of them ended up flying on Falcon 9. I think it was like EchoStar 23 and something else that were now that the Falcon 9's been so upgraded, it was able to do it in expendable mode. But I think there's like 3 more payloads actually still on the potential manifest for Falcon Heavy. And I wouldn't be surprised if all goes well. I think we could potentially see it fly again this year. And whether or not it'll be literally the same cores if everything goes well, or if they decide that's too much refurbishment and they want to wait until they have the Block 5 more friendly refurbishable version ready to go and make that into the next Falcon Heavy, that wouldn't surprise me either, in which case we might not see that for a little while. But there we go.
Yeah, just to let you know, the additional flights that Falcon Heavy has, we have the test flight with the Tesla Roadster, sort of a Elon's teapot Roadster in orbit. We also have Arabsat 6A from Arabsat, for a Saudi Arabian communications company. Mike, you're spot on with the United States Air Force flying STP-2 at some point this year. We also have the Crew Dragon to do the free return trajectory from around the moon, which, considering the reports that have come out about the Crew Dragon from the U.S. government, probably not happening this year. Also, Viasat has Viasat 3 set to fly sometime in 2020. So there's actually 5 launches, if you can go with that, with 4 customers on that, because one of those is the upcoming test launch that we are about to.
That's all we know about. Too. There might always be,
that's all we know.
So there
about.
might be way more in the backlog that SpaceX hasn't talked about or published yet. I mean, that's just kind of the way that works.
Yeah. I totally agree with the idea that there's contracts there. It's just that the ink needs to dry after the test launch, as opposed to. I'm sure after the test launch, it'll be the cool hip thing to talk about getting your payload on Falcon Heavy ready to go. So just to sort of work with the questions that we've been getting from the chat room, like from Lars Nielsen here, which is that how many more static fires does everyone think before launch of this first Falcon Heavy? Tim, Everyday Astronaut, you said 0, right? You think it's 0?
And you know what? I'd forgotten about those individual tests that they had done with the individual cores. So you might be right about that. We'll see what happens for that, but I had completely forgotten about all those additional tests that they had done for it first. So I bet you I'm willing to change my mind on that.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard, I think the main reason I'm thinking 0 is I just haven't even heard any wind of there being a second test fire. Yeah. I hear, you hear static fire, and I have never heard now we're going to try our longer version of static. I've not heard anything like that from anybody. So that to me is the only reason, but at the same time, I haven't heard that they're not going to. But normally you'd think if there's a second static fire, you'd probably start hearing birds chirping about it,
Yeah, and I'm going to say, I will personally say, I think there's going to be at minimum 1 more static fire. I think it's more likely with 2 more before it actually flies. Because I feel like there's probably some ground support equipment stuff that needs to be checked out. Also, definitely you want your team that is going to be in control of this launch super ready to go. And I feel like it may take a little bit longer, not to say that people at SpaceX don't know what they're doing, but it's always, especially with a test flight like this, with as much as riding on it and as public as it is too.
Yeah,
it's definitely significantly more advantageous to err on the side of caution and kind of just take it as easy as you can and really work out every single bug that you can think of that could possibly come up. And
it's funny, speaking about it being so public, this is just sort of like a funny side note, but I had reached out to see if, when I was down there for press stuff, if I could be able to go see, Falcon Heavy. And I was down there last month in December, and I knew Falcon Heavy was in the hangar. Reached out to, the media at SpaceX.com, and they told me they're literally trying to downplay it. I know it doesn't sound like they're downplaying it because Elon's launching his personal Tesla Roadster and all this stuff, but they're trying to kind of not overhype this. And yeah, I think Elon is just, it's Elon, so anything he does will be like, hopefully not, but massively public. And this is no exception. I think they're trying to keep a little bit of the media under reins with this thing, and I think they're failing because it's like the biggest It's everywhere. It's the biggest event of this is like the Super Bowl and the Olympics wrapped into a solar eclipse. It's just like the biggest space event of ever. So
yeah,
at least in our generation at this point, it seems like that.
It's definitely, it's going to be the biggest rocket to fly since the last Saturn V lofted Skylab, or at least the biggest, the biggest to fly since the space shuttle stopped in 2011. So so there's a lot riding on it.
And something else that I wanted to say, too, is that even though this is probably the biggest space event of the year and something that people have been looking forward to for a long, long time, this is not SpaceX's priority right now. Their priority for this year is getting all their customers launched on Falcon 9 that they have booked for this year, and then getting Crew Dragon certified so that they can keep the schedules. Those are the two biggest priorities for SpaceX this year. So, if they get Falcon Heavy, great, and if they're able to launch do another launch this year and maybe take some of those other publicly available payloads, then great. I have a feeling, though, that since they're going to be doing like Ariane 5 style, they'll have like dual payloads and stuff, especially if it's payloads that are heading for similar orbits. Some of these launches, like the ViaSat-3 one, may or may not have like additional payloads, at least CubeSats and like smaller things like that might ride along with it. So that's the big priority, though, for this year is launching all of the customers that they have booked for Falcon 9 and then getting Crew Dragon certified. So I can understand why they want to downplay things.
So a little thought experiment here, and I always hate to go in this kind of an area, but it is spaceflight, and things, a million things have to go right, but all it takes is one thing to go wrong. If Falcon Heavy does sort of detonate itself at some point during the flight, what's that going to do to this whole program? What are the repercussions of something like that occurring?
Depends when it happens.
So I think if it's obviously an event that has nothing, that's 100% wholly unique to the Falcon Heavy, such as, booster separation, if it's something that occurs during that point, then I don't think that'll have any effect on like the Falcon 9 launches for the year, because that has only to do with Falcon Heavy. But say an engine fails and it ruptures, if one of the, they have 27 engines running at once, this is in a sense 3 times more the risk, but at the same time, it's also kind of more redundancy as well when you're trying to loft something into payload or tip something into orbit. But say there was some crazy anomaly that had never, ever, ever popped up before, and it's a common anomaly that they realize, this is a root cause in our turbo pumps or in our, fuel system or something in our fuselage that's common to Falcon 9. There will be a stand down. There will be a massive, massive stand down. And so I even think, say it were to go boom at T plus 20 seconds, right? I think there'd be a stand down for at least a month to make sure, that it is, to try to determine initially whether or not it's at all Falcon 9 related or if it's specific to Falcon Heavy. And if it is Falcon 9 related, we'll see a stand down again of probably 6 months while they investigate, kind of like we saw previously with AMO 6 and with CRS-7.
Mm-hmm. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
That's the thing that worries me. Yeah, that's the thing that worries me is if there is a catastrophic failure, if it happens like on the pad before liftoff or just seconds after liftoff and causes massive, massive damage to the pad, then that one's going to be shut down as they do the repairs for it. And we just barely got SLC-40 back online so that they can do, launches from both of those spots at Cape Canaveral. And so if the pad gets damaged, that's what I'm most worried about. If there is a catastrophic failure and there's a problem with the rocket, like let's say a booster separation or something like that, then yes, the Falcon Heavy program would be delayed and they would do an investigation and figure out whatever it is that they would need to change to hopefully have a successful second test flight. But that's the thing that I'm worried about. And I'm fine if that happens, but just I would be very bummed out if it exploded on the pad and they had to invest a ton of money and time to fix that.
Yeah. So I just kind of want to wrap it up here, sort of just give us some of your closing thoughts about the upcoming Falcon Heavy launch. And in addition to that, sort of taking a couple people in the chat room have asked us, what would we put on Falcon Heavy for the first flight? What would our personal payloads be? And I kind of just want you guys to sort of give me a little wrap up for how you're feeling about this and also tell me a little bit about the payloads. And we're going to start with you, Tim. So give it a go.
All right. Well, my thoughts, I'm one of those people that's been waiting for this since the day I found out about it in 2014. So this is 4 years coming for me. So I'm extremely excited. I think that's my overall thoughts. I'm feeling very positive. This is based on, the Falcon Heavy is based on a very reliable rocket on the Falcon 9. If anything, it won't be an engine failure because the Merlin engine is insanely reliable. It's arguably the most reliable engine. I mean, they've only ever experienced one failure in flight. So I think they're, the thing powering the beast is insanely reliable. So that's great. I'm feeling confident that it'll do well. If it makes it past booster separation, I will consider that a huge success. I think my odds, I'm like, if you want to go with the odds route, I think it'll 90% make it to max Q. I think it'll about 75% make it through booster separation, and I'm about 65% that it'll successfully get its payload into orbit, and about 60%, if it can get its payload to orbit, I'm still about 63% that it will actually be able to do its trans-Martian injection. There's no reason that if it can get into low Earth orbit that it can't make it the rest of the way. As far as what I want to put on it personally, man, you can't beat putting a Tesla in space, can you? I can't top that off. The only thing I could maybe imagine would be I'll just throw my whole house in there and seal it up with some weather seal things and live in space in my own house for a bit. That's about the only thing I can think that'd be more fun for me personally, but that might get lonely and very deathly very quickly, but that's about all I got.
Your own personal private Bigelow? So
yeah,
is that
that's
how it
exactly
goes?
what.
That was a B-52
That's what
song,
I was going
right?
to say.
No, it wasn't. Anyways, Space Mike, tell us a little bit about what you got there. So.
Oh man. Well, that's what I would put. I would put a Bigelow module. I would put a BA 330 module on there, stuffed full with an airlock and a couple of spacesuits and maybe some MMUs, some manned maneuvering units, and yeah, try to stay up there for as long as possible. It would almost be like I would put myself in a voluntary rescue mission. Trap myself in a BA 330 module, and it's a race. It's a race for the commercial partners to send up a commercial crew vehicle to be able to bring me home.
Oh my gosh!
That's what I want to send. A BA 330 module with me in it. Yeah.
Sweet.
Oh man, I guess I'm super excited about this. I've been following. I'm like you, Tim. I've been following this since day one, and as I've gotten more into my aerospace engineering education, I began to understand more things about like why things get delayed and why there's problems and come up with that. And it's been really cool seeing them all step up to these issues and solve them and figure out ways to do that, and just see the amazing amount of work that the folks down in everywhere that SpaceX is just doing some incredible stuff, and I'm super excited about it. I'm also like incredibly nervous about it. The only thing I'm more nervous about than this is launching James Webb. And this to me seems like one of those big enablers of the future of spaceflight that everyone wants to see. So that's what's so exciting about it. And to me, if I were to put a payload on it, sort of continuing in the tradition that SpaceX has done with a wheel of cheese on the first Dragon flight, I would put a 63 metric ton block of cheese on top of Falcon Heavy and launch that into low Earth orbit. So then not only do you have humanity's star, you also have humanity's brick of cheese in orbit. I'm sure that would be visible from the surface of the Earth.
And it could be rendezvoused for years and provide all the nourishment for future astronauts and colonies. It's a great idea.
I think cheese
Just
without
imagine
gas.
a giant brick of cheese just bubbling and boiling with all the radiation.
Like whenever it eventually re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, that's going to be a sweet nacho party wherever it lands. So it'd be pretty awesome. All right. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and head to break. And when we come back, your comments from last week's show. So stay tuned. There's more tomorrow in just a minute.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
Hi, Welcome back. Sorry. That was a really quick turnover. So I apologize for those of you who are watching live and had a little bit of an extra pause. And those of you who are watching on demand don't know what the difference anyway. In any case, we want to make sure that we give another huge thank you to our escape velocity citizens. These people, of course, get their name on all 3 segments of the show and so very much more. And then we also have our orbital citizens. They get their name in the show again, of course, with $5 per episode on Patreon or $15 a month on, or I was going to say Minds.com because that's what the script says, and that's what I'm saying. In any case, we also have our suborbital citizens, and these people have given us some money as well, so they get their name in the 3rd segment of the show. They get access to our exclusive Patreon. It says Patreon. Our Hangouts. Oh, man, and so much more. If you would like to not listen to me ramble, feel free to head on over to patreon.com/TMRO or makersupport.com/TMRO. I don't even know if mine is still on there. We really need to get that fixed.
It is not.
Blame it on Ben is BIOB. Any case.
Yeah.
So
seriously, thank you, everybody. We wouldn't be doing this without you.
Absolutely, we really wouldn't. I mean, we would, but it wouldn't be nearly as interesting or as entertaining. All the way around.
That's for sure. So.
I know, carry and breathe. I'm breathing just fine. In any case, last week we had a great interview with Paul Hildebrand with the First to the Moon Kickstarter project. It's a really cool graphic. And as of this morning, which means a couple of hours ago, they've raised $25,829. Which is really awesome. And thank you to everyone who donated to their Kickstarter project. We have obviously donated to their Kickstarter project. I assume everyone else here as well.
Yes, I have. So,
really cool. Really excited to see that come to fruition. So that should be a lot of fun. Paul makes some really good stuff. If you haven't seen his other stuff, Fight for
Space.
Thank you, Fight for Space. I was going to say Fight for Apollo because I'm just combining the two of them. Really good show. In any case, so to get started, as Ben would say, all right, moving on. First comment comes from YouTube from one Chris Marshall saying, instead of asking which launch will first, SLS being the Space Launch System, BFR, Big Falcon rocket, or New Armstrong, I think a better question would be who will first send a crew to orbit the moon. This is in reference, of course, to our ending questions, our sort of general questions we ask everybody at the end of the interviews. I think that's actually a really decent suggestion.
Yeah, I like that a little bit better. And I guess, should we ask everybody who we think is going to first orbit the moon?
Oh, yeah, sure. Mike, we're going to start with you. Who do you think is going to first send a crew to orbit the moon?
I think SpaceX.
Yeah?
Unless New Armstrong comes online like next month or something like that.
Which, I mean, for all we know, they probably already did it, and we will get a video in 2 more weeks. It just seems to be the way things go over there at Blue Origin. Poke. Mr. Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut.
So just to be specific, he was talking specifically BFR and not just SpaceX in general, right? In which case...
so the question used to be, or is as it is currently, do you think who was going to launch first, SLS, BFR, or New Armstrong? But instead, what Chris Marshall is suggesting is that we strike that question completely and say, who will first send a crew to orbit the moon?
Okay, I just thought he was saying which of these 3 rockets will first send crew around the moon. In that case, I'm going to agree with Mike. I think it'll be Falcon Heavy with their, lunar. Although that won't orbit the moon. Hey, that won't orbit the moon.
That's true.
They don't have enough Delta V. It's a free return trajectory on the Falcon Heavy. So orbit the moon. SLS might have a better chance of that, which... Who knows? Hey, maybe someday someone sitting there will go, we're just going to fund it, and we'll have 2 SLS launches actually in the books, ready to go, and it might happen. And that could happen relatively quickly if someone actually gave NASA the right amount of money to finish up and get it online. So I would say the SLS actually has a good chance of orbiting the moon first with crew on board.
Interesting. Yeah. As Chris Ratcliffe in the chat room says, quote, who do you think will send a crew to orbit the moon? Yes. And then as Seki, of course, always points out, who will send a crew to orbit the moon again? Because as we all know, NASA already did that. So there's that. If I had to choose, I would say Bigelow, because I feel like they're always the underdog, and we have a tendency to always forget about them, and they very much so, like Blue Origin, kind of just always pull stuff out of their butts. And they're like, oh, hey, by the way, we're doing a thing. Like, oh, of course you are, because of course you are. Mr. Jared, what do you...
I think it's going to be a Space Launch System with an Orion to orbit the moon first.
Nice. All right. Well, you heard it here first. I guess the dollar bets or the steak bets, depending on who you ask, is already down.
Beer bet. So I'll take a beer.
I'm good. I'm good with that. At Wavelength Brewery in Vista. See what I did there?
Plug them. Plug them.
Hey, they deserve it, and y'all should be out here anyway. So there's that. So the next question or comment comes off of YouTube as well from Kim Bondergaard, and I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. The umlauts always screw me up, so we're just gonna go with Bondergaard. It says, thanks for adding a monthly option. Now I can actually get back to it as a supporter and at a higher level. Having it fixed at the end of the month makes it so much easier to support you, and I don't know what I would do without you. With a little smiley face. Thank you. We don't know what we would do without you, quite honestly, as we have mentioned a number of times here. And you know what Ben has been trying to do from the start is make it easy and accessible to everyone who wants to help support us. And the other nice thing is that you don't have to always support us monetarily. We have plenty of people who do a lot of things behind the scenes. I owe every single one of you way too many thanks. You know who you are. But yeah, any help that we get on our Twitter page, on our Facebook page, you know, even supporting like Twitch and the chat room. Tars does an amazing job. There's so many of you who are donating your time, and we very much so thank and appreciate you as well. So it's, you know, like we said, we wouldn't be here without you guys. So
yes.
I'm mispronouncing names and everything. Next comment comes off of YouTube from one David Huber, I believe. What are the objects that fall off the Long March vehicles after launch? Now, Mr. Mike, I know that you have a lot of experience with the footage and lack of footage on some of these vehicles. Can you answer that question?
To my understanding, it is this styrofoam foam meshing that they have on the outside of the payload fairing, and that it is also ice that forms on the outside of the upper stages, and at least the upper stages that are using cryogenics anyway, which is not every single one. But for a lot of the launches, especially the ones that we've seen so far this month that do not have cryogenic upper stages, that was a styrofoam foam that comes in this really interesting block pattern around the payload fairing, and then separates at launch.
Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I just assumed it was ice, but I suppose that makes sense if it's ice and some of the insulation.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is really cool. All right, and we all learned something today. Next comment comes off of Patreon, actually, from one Jason Hammond that I still want to call Mike Hammond? Anyway, it doesn't matter. SLS says SLS will launch first. Space Launch System will launch first. Then BFR, Big Falcon Rocket, will launch with so much more affordability that it jumps to first in the market. And then Blue Origin will release a video of them having launched New Armstrong first after all. Right? I mean, that's kind of how it feels anyway, which would be amazing. In no way am I against that happening at all. I think that would be absolutely incredible. Go ahead, Tim.
I love and hate. That's what I love and hate about Blue Origin.
Yes.
They're like this weird mystery stepchild thing that like just all of a sudden would be like, oh, by the way, surprise, I bought you a house. Like, it's just like, wait, I love you, but like, give me a little warning. Give me a little glimpse into what you're thinking in there, Blue Origin.
They're sort of like that uncle that you haven't heard for 5 years that suddenly shows up at your Christmas party, and you're just like, you're here.
No, but
you're
see,
alive.
so
But
I'm happy you're here.
Right.
In a good way.
Right. As Chris Parr in the chat room says, Richard Hammond from Top Gear. That's exactly what I'm thinking of. It's less that the uncle that you haven't heard of from 5 years showing up at your Christmas party. It's more like he shows up 5 days after Christmas and is like, hey, Merry Christmas. And you're like, oh, okay. First of all, where have you been? And secondly, you just missed Christmas. But I mean, thanks, I guess, because this is exactly what I wanted.
He was there. He was in the basement, cleaning the basement, and then lining the walls with money for some reason. He did a great thing. He just didn't tell anybody about it and then popped out way too late. And by the way, we should have clarified too, New Armstrong so Blue Origin only has 3 rockets that they've talked about so far. There's the New Glenn, which is their suborbital tourism rocket that just goes boop, boop. Then they have a New Armstrong.
That's New Shepard.
Or New Glenn.
That's
New Shepard, sorry. New Shepard, then New Glenn is their... New Glenn is their next orbital rocket that'll be in between a Falcon Heavy and a Falcon 9, so kind of I think it's like a smaller heavy launch vehicle. Medium class. And then they have kind of teased at there being a New Armstrong, which is apparently like something capable of landing humans on the moon. So we think almost like a BFR class that they've only talked about like once. So
wasn't there like a video they had in the factory that they happen to have like some sort of spherical thing in the background that was like, somebody had measured it. It was like 12 meters in diameter or something like that. And everybody went nuts when
Like
they
a
saw
portal?
that.
What are we
They're
talking
like,
about
oh my
right
gosh, like an interstage or something. So, I mean, like
a tank roller.
I distinctly remember the internet freaking out when Blue Origin released a video once.
I feel like we always freak out when Blue Origin releases a video because they never...
The video.
That's
okay.
true.
Which,
So-
by the way, Chris Radcliffe says he's already typing from the moon as we speak.
Yes, so.
Yeah.
So.
Hilarious. I mean, yes, to be fair, ton of video from launching Mannequin Skywalker into almost space. They definitely get credit for that. Absolutely. There's no reason not to in any way, shape, or form.
How awesome is it that now that we have like all these choices of heavy lift vehicles coming up?
Yeah.
Like pick your flavor.
Absolutely amazing.
That's so cool.
Dan Thomas from YouTube says, will Blue Origin need to hold up a newspaper at their launch to show that when they launched, when they say? I think that's a brilliant idea, honestly, just so we all know what's going on.
Nice.
We give Blue Origin a lot of crap for that, but it's all out of love. I want to be very clear about that. As Ben likes to say, all ships rise with the tide. So as long as people are doing stuff and succeeding and like learning even from the failures, then we're all good all the way around.
Exactly.
I know, fanboys. I know. I'm sorry. All right, next comment comes off of Facebook from one Thomas Muscarella, says, it seems that they keep moving the bar each time Boeing or SpaceX meets the minimum requirements. If they expect a 100% guarantee, then the United States will never launch a person into space again. Now, this was a comment very specifically about Mike's space pod. So, Mike, I will give you the first chance at responding to that, and then I'm sure Mike, Tim, and Jared, you're probably also both biting in the bit. So go ahead, Mike.
Well, what this is referring to is that the safety requirements for the commercial crew vehicles are so much higher safety standards than the space shuttle or even anything that NASA has flown before. And I personally think it's very hypocritical to hold them to such a high standard when NASA didn't even hold itself to such a high standard. And every time that there are new requirements or a new report saying that, they're not going to be able to meet this particular requirement and have this level of safety that you are requiring by this particular date, and things get pushed back. And we don't know exactly what all the internal workings are in the commercial crew office, but it seems to me like a lot of the different advisory groups are, they understand that this is a really high milestone. I believe it's like, having a fatal flight of one in less than like 270 launches or something like that. One in 1,000 launches, and the space shuttle couldn't even get to one in, I believe it was I believe that was the 270 number where. Yeah, super low. So it's just a really high standard to hold them to. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the information that has been coming out is that it seems to me like the program managers, people like Mike Sufarendi and I'm spacing on his name right now. William Gerstenmaier, are willing to take risks. They want to be able to have less stringent requirements and be able to get these commercial crew vehicles flying as soon as possible, especially since we have a very limited number of time that we have remaining Soyuz flights on. Sorry to turn this into a long answer here, but
no, it's fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it is. We will hopefully see the need kind of outweigh these high standards, and it's such a weird thing to say because I don't ever really want to say we should lower the bar when it comes to human space flight. No, I'm not saying that we should have a lower bar, but we should just have a realistic bar, a realistic expectation of these vehicles. And I mean, they're riding on controlled explosions into space. I mean, you can only get something like that so safe. So I'm hoping that they will be able to get the certification that they need and that they're able to get all the different milestones done and that there isn't any more sliding to the right of the schedules because we need those vehicles online as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. I guess we could go into this for quite a little bit longer. But
I'm sure this could be a very, very long discussion. Totally, which is kind of funny because it's not really a discussion. I think we all are basically on the same page. But Mr. Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut, would you like to add your 2 cents to that?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, for me personally, I can't stress enough that once humans are actually involved, I would rather err on the side of delays personally, as long as, I mean, yes, it sucks, and yes, some of the things might be a little bit unrealistic, but at the same time, you're talking about someone's life, and luckily, we look back at the space shuttle program with a lot of like, why didn't they think of this, or this, and this? And I feel like this is our chance to redeem ourselves, at least from the United States' standpoint, and rethink a lot of things. And this might be what the teething pains of that. This might be the people overthinking things, which in the long run can only lead to a safer vehicle and a safer access to space and fewer setbacks in the long run. So, if it means that, we have to make sure we've dotted every single I and crossed every single T, and if we have to wait one more year to do that, I'm okay with that personally. But it is very frustrating because I think we were supposed to be launching in like 2014 originally with people or something, and it's just gone way to the right. And some things do seem unrealistic, but, again, back to the space shuttle thing, it had 98.5% success in the long run, with two disasters, 2 complete losses out of 135 flights. And I think the thing we need to remember is, as long as you could have a loss of vehicle with a capsule, like what, Boeing and what SpaceX with their Dragon capsule, you could have a loss of vehicle, and the abort system could make it so you might still have that same 98.5 vehicle success rate, but you could still have 100% life, where people would still be able to survive the explosion due to abort systems. So there's a certain amount of, weighing out the options there between being patient and being overly, that's my thoughts.
Gotcha. All right. Mr. Jared?
Yeah, safety is critical. If you wanna fly unsafe spacecraft, that's fine. But you could definitely look at the space shuttle for that, and you could see how quickly space shuttle was moved to essentially end the program after the Columbia accident. That was sort of the point where it was basically like, no, we're done with this.
What was the numerical designation on that?
Huh?
Do you remember? That was STS.
STS 107. So
Gotcha.
At that point, it was just basically build the ISS. It's done. So they ended up throwing a Hubble flight in there just because astronomers really wanted it, and the astronauts said, "Yeah, let's do it." But if you want to build a spacecraft that consistently loses the crew, you have to do that on your own money. You can't do that on taxpayer funding. And I know that there are people out there who advocate the removal of safety for spaceflight. I personally think that they're bonkers, because if you want to design a car that doesn't have a lot of safety features in it, good luck getting customers to actually want to buy it.
Right.
So it's safety is so critically important, and I'm with Tim. I have no problem with delays if it means that it's actually going to work as it's intended to. I also have no problem with asking commercial companies to step up and learn from lessons that NASA has had to painfully go through in order to make that work. So, Space Shuttle was an incredibly dangerous vehicle, and we learned how dangerous it was, and we learned why it was dangerous. And it's unfortunate that those lessons had to be learned due to with loss of life involved in it as well. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you get to relax on your safety standards.
Sure.
If anything from that, we need to look at the safety standards and figure out how can we raise these safety standards, because ultimately it is up to who's buying the flight, that is their parameters that they want to work with. So
if I can touch on something
go ahead
related to that, there's a lot of political favoritism going on here too, and the safety requirements between SpaceX and Boeing are not the same. One of the big things that I have a really big problem with is that SpaceX is required to prove that their abort system works in flight, in a demonstration flight. Boeing is not required to do that. All they're required to do is just do a ground pad abort test. And there's other different safety requirements that we don't have the time to get into right now that SpaceX is required to fulfill and Boeing is not. So there is favoritism going on here, and that's a big part of my problem, and these unrealistic expectations. I'm fully with you guys that yes, we want to have these vehicles as safe as possible, but adding new requirements that were not part of the original contract, that were not part of the original deal, to purposefully delay the program due to political reasons is what I have a problem with.
Yes.
Yeah, on a sober note, this is the week of remembrance. Unfortunately, there's been more than one loss of life event during this week. And to Jared's point, talking about building any of these commercial companies, building on the lessons that NASA have had painfully learned. We're not going to get through this without people being able to collaborate in some manner. Whether that's NASA saying, "Hey, these are things that we've done. You don't want to do this because of X, Y, and Z, and this is why." And that all of these things are going to have to be. We're going to have to communicate. This isn't just a NASA thing, a Boeing thing, Virgin Orbit or anything. This is a humanity thing that we're going to have to figure out if we're going to get anywhere, which is kind of a big deal. Any other last words? I hate leaving on that so much of a downer. But the thing is that what I feel is going on, though, is that there is a lot of communication that is going on so that those accidents don't continue to happen in that manner, which is good. It's hard being a human spaceflight advocate when you know that literal lives are on the line. And it's one of the reasons that we get so excited about it, though, right? We get so excited because we have humans that we can relate to. We feel like that could be us one day, and that's something to look forward to, and that's really exciting, I think. Yeah. That's one of the reasons I'm a fan. Yeah. So there's that. All right, so that pretty much does it for this show. Again, I hate to leave on such a low note, but I have more thank yous to give out because there's that. We have our ground support citizens. Look at all those names. It's just crazy pants. You, of course, also get your name in the show because you deserve it. You also get access to some hangouts, and you get early access to After Dark, which is what's coming up very shortly here. I want to make sure that everyone understands, again, that if you are interested in any of these things, you can head over to patreon.com/TMRO or makersupport.com/TMRO. And hopefully I will get the scripts right. So the next time I have to say these things, I actually tell you the correct places to go to, which would be really awesome. And then, like I said, so next week, we will not have a Tim Dodd, but we will be having a really fantastic discussion about GLXP and GLXP ending, you guys.
Yeah, the Google Lunar X Prize.
And so we're going to move away a little bit from human spaceflight and a little bit more into some moon discussions, which should be very interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. So if you are watching live, or if you are a Tomorrow citizen, you will be getting After Dark right up next. Thanks for being with us, guys. See you next week.